Chapter 12, The Kite, from JE2US-A Novel. Strangely, we went undercover after that day. Just when it seemed like there was an objective direction to our tribe, we retreated. Peter wasn't happy about this. Thomas didn't really care one way or the other. Judas was pissed at Jesus and refused to talk to him for a whole week. Bartholomew just rambled semi-incoherently in lofty dialect while dumpster diving for breakfast. The Sons of Thunder had been working on a song that they undoubtedly hoped would be the war cry for the revolution. It was a variation on the "We Shall Overcome" lyric, but of course with a head-banging intensity, a musical score for an alley brawl. Maddie wasn't too happy about it either. I saw marks on her, black and blue marks, where the governor obviously was gripping her arm so tightly that it left a bruise. But she never said a word about it. She knew Jesus had the power to do things, extraordinary things. If he hated slavery so much and had the power to do something about it but didn't, what was that all about? What did that make him? It didn't make any sense to me either. What was he waiting for? This stop-start, herky-jerky strategy didn't exactly instill us with confidence in our leader. But here we were, sitting on the Stone Arch Bridge early one morning, just us and our Jesus. Judas had made up with Jesus. They had had several private talks, and Judas came away with at least a tolerable understanding. But he carried a reticence that wasn't very well hidden. This morning, he sat furthest away from Jesus, facing perpendicular, as if to indicate, "You're only getting half of my attention." "How are you all feeling about your numbers?" Jesus asked, touching a finger to the number on the back of his hand. Judas turned the additional 90 degrees, now with his back to Jesus, closed for business. Maddie shrugged. "Come see, come saw." It was a French term of indifference she'd heard the governor repeat whenever she asked him strawberry or rhubarb jam. She had fantasized about asking the governor if he would prefer that she plunge the butter knife between L3 and 4 or L4 and 5 on the back of his neck. Then with a "come see, come saw," she would stab indiscriminately. Peter was playing with his Glock 26, slowly flipping it hand to hand. He had 9 rounds loaded and 1 in the chamber. He said, "I'm feeling good about my number. After burning hundreds of these onto others, it feels strangely at home on my hand." Pushing the safety on and off, he said, "Plus, I feel like I'm actually part of the revolution now." "Well, you're not, Peter," Maddie fired back at him. "All you got, all of you, you're bent out of shape because your pretty little skin got messed up. My life got messed up. This number is just the shiny surface of slavery. When your hope gets locked up and the key gets thrown away, then come talk to me about being one of us, joining the revolution." She had no tears, just a frigid stare. Peter slid his gun under his belt. It feels weird to hear an 18-year-old girl put the brakes on a man like Peter. Jesus stood and took a few steps away from us. Then he turned and leaned against the railing. The mighty Mississippi was rushing 80 feet below us, the falls just upstream. I could feel the cool of the mist on my skin. Jesus had brought a kite along today, a kite he had evidently made himself. There was nothing overly fancy about this kite, but it looked like it might fly. It was one of those rudimentary, old-school diamond-shaped flyers made of a cross sticks and a paper covering. The tail had thin-cut strands of a silk-like fabric. I had seen Judas giving Thomas a look when he saw Jesus pick up the kite and tell us we were going flying. I have to admit, sometimes there's this bipolar aspect to Jesus, challenging the deepest issues and most powerful people in society one minute, and then flying a kite the next. Hard to figure. Jesus stood by the railing, kite in hand. "Maddie's right," he said. "The number doesn't make you slaves. You were all slaves long before that." He let that sink in while he checked the knot attached to the bridle of the kite, making sure it was secure. The minute you tie yourself to something or someone, you become a slave. He leaned over and invited Peter to show him the number on his hand. Jesus made a mental note of it, pulled a marker from his pocket, then wrote Pete's number in large numbers across the front of the kite. The question is, who holds your string? With that, he threw the kite into the air and very expertly began giving the kite slack, tight, then slack, pulling, then letting it run. He moved almost dance-like as he flew the kite, orchestrating the dips and dives, subtle nuances, a gentle tug to the right, a bend to the left, and the kite responded. They almost seemed connected, as if the kite understood and mirrored the inclinations of Jesus' body English. We got caught up in the dance we were observing. There was such a freedom to it, effortless. The kite and Jesus locked in sync. Then Jesus began reeling in the kite. When it was within reach, he grabbed it and set it down on the ground in front of us. He looked at Judas, who had turned back to the action, unable to ignore what was happening. "Judas, have you got $1 in your pocket?" Judas squinted at the odd question, but dug in his pocket and handed it to Rosalita, who handed it to Jesus. He carefully tied it to one of the tail strings on the kite. "Rosalita, hand me your watch." She did, and he tied it to another one of the tail strips. "Thomas, hand me your skepticism." Thomas, confused, but trying to look cool, looked away. Jesus made as if he was tying it to the kite's tail. "James, hand me your fear." James was visibly upset that Jesus, or anyone for that matter, would think he was afraid of anything. "Bartholomew, may I have your confusion?" Without hesitation, Bartholomew reached out his hand to Jesus, all the while mumbling, "Confusion, confusion, confusion." "Philip, hand me your need to be somebody." "What?" I looked down. "John, hand me your career." "Maddie, hand me your hatred and anger." He went through our group like a bulldozer, dredging up our most personal anxieties, the dreams that we lived for and the crutches we leaned on, exposing them, exposing us. Then he turned to look at Peter. I could tell Peter was wondering what flaw Jesus was going to call him out on. Jesus reached out his hand and said, "Peter, give me your gun." They made eye contact. Peter hesitated, but handed his Glock over to Jesus. Jesus very methodically tied it to the tail of the kite bearing Peter's number. Then he stood, kite in hand. He looked around our circle, then threw the kite with its ornamented tail over the railing. It made a dash for the river. It was taking string at 20 feet per second. The spool in Jesus' hand whirred as it unraveled. Then Jesus very deliberately pressed his thumb against the spool, slowing it down gradually till it stopped, just feet from the water. He let it dangle there. He spoke. We get attached to things. Then they get attached to us. We put our hope in things. Then they weigh down on us. While he spoke, he began reeling in the kite. We put our trust in things that can't lift us up. We put our faith in things that prove to be unworthy. He continued reeling. We lean on ideas, power, strength, certainty, until they all prove themselves to be imposters. I heard Peter's gun clang against the side of the bridge as Jesus grabbed the bridle of the kite. We have to let them go. Jesus, holding the kite over the railing, pulled the tail strips one by one from the kite and let them fall into the river below. Judas' dollar, Rosalita's watch, the skepticism, fear, insecurity, anger, hatred, shame, dreams, careers, control, Peter's gun. Peter twitched almost imperceptibly as his Glock plunged into the river below. Jesus turned back to our circle. So, is there a something worth tying our hopes to? Someone? He threw the kite back into the air, and again it flew. He reeled out the string, giving the kite every inch of play available in his spool. It was 200, maybe 300 feet out over the river, playing in the breeze, carefree. Jesus again turned back to us and said, "So, Peter is up there blowing in the breeze, free as a bird." Jesus looked back at the kite, then back to us, tugging on the string once, twice, 3 times. Or is he? Again, looking at the kite, Jesus said, as if talking to the kite, "We are all slaves to something or someone, and there's no shortage of those willing to pull on your string." Back to us, he said, "Choose carefully who you serve. There is one who loves you and will fly you with such ease that you will feel more free than if no one at all was holding you." Don't be fooled, my friends. You cannot fly yourselves. With his right hand, he broke the string coming from the spool. He held the frayed end in the air for a moment, then let it go. The kite flew briefly. It floundered in the sky, losing loft. Then, lacking the pull to resist the wind, it drifted, fluttered, and fell from the heavens into the river below. We watched as it floated along in the current, soon to find its home in the silt and mud at the bottom of the river. With earnest conviction, Jesus said, "I will hold you. I will guide you. I will love you." Then, true freedom isn't found in flying. It's in being flown. Trust me.